David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The topic of where in Israel the United States Embassy is has been an issue really for years, probably more than 20 years at minimum, I would say. And it's been a bigger and bigger issue since Donald Trump became president of the United States, specifically because his appointment of David Friedman as ambassador of the United States to Israel came with the known desire of David Friedman to not only continue expanding settlements in Israel, which is a disaster, obviously, but also to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. And yes, indeed, Donald Trump told both Arab and Israeli leaders yesterday that he plans to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and to eventually move the embassy there. And the actual movement of the embassy, that part's going to take a while. It could take up to 6 months, but the recognizing of Jerusalem as the capital would happen immediately, and that's really the immediate controversy. And I've said it before, we're talking about it, so I'll say it again. It's a disastrous idea to unilaterally move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but I think it's necessary to explain what's going on here and why this is a huge deal. People have been emailing me saying they may not exactly understand what the implications are here. Here's one example email I got about this from a viewer named Matt, who said, "Hi, David, being embarrassingly unaware about Middle Eastern matters. I was hoping you could address this topic and explain the controversy around it. I really just don't understand it, and I don't even know which questions I should be asking to begin to educate myself. For example, maybe this is a dumb question, but why does the U.S. have a say in determining which city of a foreign country is its capital? I ask you this not because you are ethnically Ashkenazi Jewish, but because you have a track record of providing comprehensive explanations of complex issues." So here's the controversy, Matt, to begin with and sort of set up our discussion. Within Israel, Jerusalem is considered to be the capital of Israel, but Jerusalem is part of the disputed territories in Israel, which include the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and even within Jerusalem, it's mostly East Jerusalem that is in dispute, although as a result, the status of Jerusalem more broadly as a capital city is in dispute. So as a result, internationally, Tel Aviv, which is the coastal city in Israel on the Mediterranean Sea, is considered the capital for all intents and purposes. And the reason why moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem would be controversial and a bad idea is because you have, quite frankly, an intractable situation with peace negotiations in Israel. It's a total impasse, a huge part of which centers around land, and Jerusalem is part of that, is a crucial part of that. And saying we're going to put our embassy in Jerusalem as if it were the undisputed capital of Israel internationally is a total diplomatic FU. If there is such a thing as a diplomatic FU, this would be it, plain and simple. And it's going to hinder what I've been pretty clear about are already a very limited chances of serious peace negotiations going forward, particularly with the people that are in power representing Palestinians, particularly with Benjamin Netanyahu and his far-right extremist coalition in power in Israel. The U.S. unilaterally making the embassy move and recognizing Jerusalem as the capital is breaking with international consensus on something that is just simply not settled. It is not settled in any way. And once again, it's sort of like with Trump being making the U.S. the one country that doesn't participate in the Paris Climate Accords. Trump is the guy saying, nah, Jerusalem is the capital, we'll put our embassy there. Now, you could have a situation where eventually, as part of a peace agreement, West Jerusalem is Israeli and East Jerusalem is Palestinian in a non-disputed sense, but that hasn't been negotiated yet. We have East Jerusalem as a disputed territory right now, and this move by the United States will help nothing. And it's been totally written on the wall. As I said, the day after Donald Trump selected David Friedman as ambassador to Israel, an absolute and total extremist, another one of his outrageous positions, and I've mentioned this before, I want to say it again, is that Friedman is of the mindset that we should be, that Israel should be, and the U.S. should be indifferent to or encouraging or allowing Israel to build more settlements. And the range of opinion on settlements in Israel is, and I'm creating sort of a spectrum here, the settlements must be destroyed up to the settlements that are there can stay if there are meaningful land swaps eventually. And David Friedman is way outside of what is already a pretty wide spectrum of opinion on the issue of settlement. So to go back to the policy of it, Donald Trump told us Jared Kushner is going to go in and negotiate Israeli-Palestinian peace. Now, that's a joke to begin with, right? But let's imagine for a moment that Jared Kushner was going to go in and negotiate Israeli-Palestinian peace. The United States needs to appear to be an unbiased broker. Once the U.S. unilaterally says, we recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, that means we are taking a side in a number of ways, and it destroys the Trump administration's credibility as a possible arbiter of peace. But to be honest, there was not ever really a good shot of the Trump United States being that arbiter of peace, and nothing changes here as far as Israel is concerned. They've seen Jerusalem as the capital, period, throughout this period of decades. It hurts the United States, and this is a completely optional way that Donald Trump is finding to hurt the image and credibility of the United States around the world. It's symbolically disastrous, aside from whether there would really be credible peace negotiations at any point. Optional, unforced error.
And even if you say that, all right, we're going to give up on brokering a peace deal between the Israelis and the Palestinians, we're just going to take the Israeli side, shouldn't we be getting some concessions for this move as well? I mean, where's the art of the deal here? We should be getting something from the Israeli government for this, right?
If you are Trump and you're aligned with the far-right Benjamin Netanyahu, you don't want concessions. It's sort of part of the problem. In other words, the rhetorical question you're asking is correct, which is, if we are doing something that presumably Israel wants to happen, which is the international community to recognize Jerusalem as the capital, if this was an actual push-pull negotiation, we would maybe try to get some kind of concession from Israel. But the fact that there's not even a desire for that, this is something Trump and Friedman want. That's sort of the sick reality of it.
Interesting, yeah. And I think it also just has to do with Trump trying to fulfill some campaign promises.
I guess.
Now maybe he can get tax reform done or get his travel ban upheld. This is just the next thing, and maybe his voters really don't understand the issue too complexly.
Oh, they don't.
He does.
They absolutely don't. And if I was conspiratorial, I'd wonder whether this wasn't a deliberate action to flare tensions in the Middle East and take away attention from, insert scandal here. And that's already happening, right? This is already having a destabilizing impact on the Middle East. Turkey says that this declaration of Jerusalem as Israel's capital is going to start, quote, a fire with no end in sight. They announced that they're going to be hosting a meeting of Islamic nations in the region, sort of to give other Muslim leaders, other Muslim country leaders, an opportunity to create some kind of coordinated response to this. Pope Francis said he's profoundly concerned and appealed to the that everyone respect the status quo of the city of Jerusalem, which is, of course, disputed at this time. What is the upside here? That's really my question. What is the upside? Is it what Pat is pointing to, that maybe it's an accomplishment that Trump can check off? It just feels to me like fundamentally this is so far down the list of priorities for the Trump voters that it's not a good one to just go unilaterally on, but maybe I'm missing something, and we'll continue to cover it. We've been talking more and more about Mike Pence, the vice president, our fearless co-leader. Within the context of the Trump-Russia investigation, what did Mike Pence know about what was going on with regards to Russia contacts? When did he know it? If Donald Trump were to leave the Oval Office for whatever reason, would Mike Pence be a credible and sort of clean, in the untainted sense, replacement for Donald Trump? Or might Mike Pence himself be taken down as well? And months ago, we speculated that Mike Pence might have accepted the VP position, might have accepted being Donald Trump's running mate, on the off chance that Trump would be removed as a way to become president himself. We now have an absolutely riveting new report from The Atlantic by McKay Coppins, which reveals that when those infamous Access Hollywood grab 'em by the you-know-what tapes came out, of Donald Trump saying, hey, this is what I do to famous to women because I'm famous.
Don't even wait.
Don't even wait. I just do it. Mike Pence, we now know, got in touch with the Republican National Committee and made it abundantly clear that, hey, he'd be willing to replace Donald Trump as the Republican nominee on the ticket. And in fact, while all the Access Hollywood tape stuff was happening, Trump was calling Pence, we've now learned, and Mike Pence was not even returning the guy's phone calls. And it's been reported that during this phase of sort of disconnect between Pence and Trump, Trump received a letter from Mike Pence saying that Pence needed to think about whether he could even stay on the ticket with Donald Trump, which are a combination, just a group of stunning revelations. And this report in The Atlantic also exposes that this went even further. Republican officials, after the release of the Access Hollywood grab 'em by the you-know-what tapes, Republican officials were thinking, how could we push Donald Trump off the ticket? And they went as far as to think about maybe making it a Pence Condoleezza Rice ticket. And I have to tell you, this actually improves my opinion of the Republican Party slightly. And I don't mean a lot. I really mean in the slightest sense. And what I'm talking about is the Republican Party was at least thinking about the idea of pushing Donald Trump out after the Access Hollywood tape. That tells us that if nothing else, they at least realized the political liability of that recording. Now, it says nothing about their morality. It says nothing about their ethics. And ultimately, it was for nothing since Donald Trump did stay on the ticket and Republicans voted for him. But if I considered the GOP, call it 100% out of it, learning that at least there was a discussion of pushing Trump out makes my opinion that they're only 99% out of it.
I think that was just their out, though, right? The Access Hollywood tape would give them a reason to oust Trump, and then Pence would have stood a much better chance of winning than Trump did at the time.
At the time, certainly it would seem that way.
Pence's negative favorability numbers to Hillary Clinton's, they're a lot better, right?
So do you think, though, because what you're pointing out is interesting, do you think that the Access Hollywood tape didn't actually change the Republican insiders' opinion of Trump, that they always were sort of wondering how could we push him out, and it might have just it presented an opportunity? That's interesting. I mean, what's clear is that Pence never realistically believed in Trump as far as his politics are concerned, right? He saw it as a way, being Trump's running mate for Mike Pence was a way to get close to the Oval Office, and in the end, maybe it could get him into the Oval Office, because Mike Pence is a schemer, right? Pence is a genuine right-wing ideologue, for lack of a better term, which is part of why I don't think we're better off with a hypothetical Mike Pence in the White House than with Donald Trump. But don't think for even a moment that this excuses Mike Pence's behavior. He's enabling the total degeneracy of the president of the United States by pretending that the guy is normal, if that's, I guess, what Pence is doing by defending Donald Trump in public. And the other thing to remember, to get back to the many scenarios that we can imagine where Pence becomes president because Trump goes, we're sort of acting like if Trump goes, Pence will just naturally become president unopposed. When we think about Donald Trump as the vindictive, me first or only me type of guy, is it really logical to assume that Trump would just allow Pence to become president of the United States? I actually wonder if Trump has to go, whether he would try to take Pence down with him.
Yeah, and even before we get to all of that, will Trump try to oust Pence now? Of course, Trump can't fire him because Pence is elected, right? He was on the ticket as vice president.
Yeah.
But he could try to pressure Pence to leave. And given the chance that Pence has at becoming president now, I don't think he would go along with that.
I can't imagine Donald Trump calmly and respectfully leaving the presidency to Pence. I guess that's where I am. And whether the scenario is what Pat is describing or some other scenario, it's very difficult to imagine Trump saying, Mike Pence is going to do a great job and I'm leaving the country in good hands. I don't see it. Send me your thoughts if you disagree with me, or if you agree. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman. We will take a break and be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Scott McGinnis. Scott, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. We are independent, viewer and listener supported media. You can join Scott as a member, get all the great member benefits at 40% off if you use the coupon code IVoted17, IVoted17, all one word, all lowercase, at davidpakman.com/membership. Also, Patreon. We have a new Patreon goal of 2,250 patrons. I'll tell you more about that later. And you can make a pledge of as little as $1 per month. Just $1 a month supports the work that we do. at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Let's get into Hatriot Mail for the week. Hatriot Mail is what? Hatriot Mail is this.
It's like taking an apple pie, filling it with pages from the Old Testament, topping it with hollow points, and serving it with a side of homophobia. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, so I realized that I should actually explain what Hatriot Mail is, which I don't always do. Hatriot Mail is we get lots of hate mail from people, and a professional deep voice announcer guy does readings of that hate mail, and that is what becomes Hatriot Mail. And I present to you this week's edition.
Pakman, stop eating soy products. Maybe you'll grow a pair and start telling the truth. You'll never be able to brainwash us. We see right through your lies. This guy Pakman is a leftist, Marxist, socialist, communist type of guy. I don't think anyone takes him seriously. I suspect his audience are blissfully ignorant, fat, disgusting, smelly Marxist, socialist, communist feminists who enjoy staring at him as they're filling their claptraps with artificial vegan soy products to dumb themselves down even more because they know how much they suck. Ah ha 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 ha! God, Pakman is such a phony baloney.
Well, you levied there, Mr. Hatriot, any number of damning accusations about our audience. And I can tell you, at least with regard to one of those accusations, I've never met a David Pakman Show audience member that was smelly. That one I can say is not true.
And he's going after the vegan community. Don't get it wrong. I mean, we care a lot about animal welfare, but human welfare, we don't really care so much about.
No, yeah, the vegan community, if you get on their bad side, believe me, it's not what you want to do.
We get ruthless.
Yeah, it's not the people I'd be picking on. You can turn Hatriot Mail into something positive. You can use the coupon code Hatriot40 when you sign up for a membership at davidpakman.com, and that'll save you 40%. That's Hatriot40, Hatriot 40. Say, I'm giving a middle finger to the Hatriots by signing up with coupon code Hatriot40. So we're going to do a sort of proper year in review of the David Pakman Show closer to the end of the year, but I did want to sort of let you know where things are and where things are going in 2018 for the program. It's been a pretty complicated year so far, and people who have been following the show for some time are aware of a lot of this stuff. 2017 has been a record year for us in terms of audience, more YouTube subscribers than ever, more podcast downloads than ever, TV and radio affiliates more than ever. On Free Speech TV, which broadcasts us on DirecTV and Dish Network, we went from 4 shows a week. Now they are carrying all 5 of our shows every single week. So a lot of really big growth, really significant growth in terms of the audience size in 2017. But it hasn't been all good. As many of you know, we had 2 huge, crushing defeats in terms of revenue. At the beginning of April of this year, YouTube demonetization began, which initially took 99% of our YouTube revenue. We've since recovered some of that, even though it's still something that's impacting us to this day. And then about a month ago, or maybe a month and a half at this point, we lost 100% of our Amazon affiliate revenue. You used to be able to shop on Amazon through a link on our website, and we'd get a little bit of a commission every time you bought something. Amazon totally shut that down, which was like another 8 or 10% of our revenue. So it's been a complicated year, but I want to tell you what's on the table for 2018. Number one, there are a number of plans in place for many more deep dive investigations and even sort of more academic mini-series on a lot of important issues. And part of that is going to be because part-time producer Noah Ferguson is going to be joining us full time. And that's going to complement the great work that Pat is doing. It's going to complement what I'm doing. And it'll allow us to even further improve the production value of the show, more long form pieces. And Noah's going to be helping out on some of the business side of the show as well. So that's really exciting for 2018. Now, in terms of what's upcoming more specifically when it comes to content and what you can do now to help the show, many things going on. Number one, if you go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, you will see that there's a new Patreon goal of 2,250 patrons. And before we go to that, Pat, you'll notice that it is so easy to use the Patreon platform. You go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Just click that orange button, or maybe pinkish, orangish pink.
I call it orange.
Red.
That's orange.
That says become a patron. And you become a patron for as little as $1 a month. We have established a new goal, which I will read to you, of 2,250 patrons. Previously, after we achieved 2,000 patrons, the next goal was 2,500, but I've decided to create an intermediate goal to create more of a sense of urgency. At 2,250 patrons, we will record, edit, and upload a multi-part critical thinking mini-series, first to our patrons and eventually for full distribution. This is something that we've been working on for a long time, actually, and it's been about 90% done in terms of the content. And that last 10%, we just haven't gotten over the hump and finished. And part of putting this up as a Patreon goal, 2250, is once we get to 2250, we're committed to doing it. And I think it's going to get us to actually complete this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I want a teaser now. What are the topics that we're going to focus on under the umbrella of critical thinking?
Very good. That was not a planned question, by the way, from Pat, lest anybody be confused. I'm trying to think now. Logical fallacies, identifying good and bad arguments. It's like 12 or 15 different topics that we're going to be covering in this mini-series. It's going to be really, really good. When we reach 2250 patrons, we will do it. And this is a donor target, not a money target, right? So if you can contribute $1, that counts just as much towards the goal as if you can contribute 10 or 50 or $100. Okay, really good mini-series, a lot of work, but we're going to do it. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Number 2, in terms of what's going on to get us to close out the year really strongly, 2018 calendars are here, okay? If you go to davidpakman.com/calendar18, you'll see that there are 2 options for this calendar. The calendar is composed of 100% viewer-created artwork. This is the 4th year in a row that we are doing these calendars. You can get the calendar for free with a membership, autographed. You can also get just a calendar, autographed or not autographed. Get the orders in at davidpakman.com/calendar18 so that we can get them to you before the end of the year. This is a really great calendar.
And if you buy 11 months, you get the 12th month free.
That's right. Yeah, you only pay for 11 months of the calendar, but December is a free month that we're including. I don't know what that means, but it sounds pretty good, so I'm including it. And then lastly, the other thing you can do to help us, and this costs nothing at all, we are on a new platform called Steemit. Steemit is a blockchain-based sort of reputation curation platform. You can go to steemit.com/@David Pakman. That's STEEMIT.com. Sign up. Takes a couple days for account approval right now. They're working on improving that. Then just follow us and upvote what we post. And that you don't have to spend a penny. And you will actually be supporting us financially. And I encourage you to engage with the community there. Really a lot of great content. So a few different things going on, and I will come to you before the end of the year with a full sort of year in review. Love to look at top stories from the year, most disliked, most engagement, all that different stuff. So we'll do that by the end of the year with you. And in the meantime, join our subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT to submit your suggestions for 2018 content.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome Pavlina Tcherneva back to the program. She's an associate professor of economics and director of the economics program at Bard College. We are today going to talk about modern monetary theory. Pavlina, this is something many people in my audience over the last 6 to 12 months have been increasingly asking me to talk about, and I've been reading about it now for several months. Let's start sort of at the very beginning. Modern monetary theory is modern when compared to what? In other words, it's a counterpoint to what sort of default economic theory?
Well, it's a counterpoint to the theory that says that money somehow emerges out of barter. The anthropological record shows that there has never been such a thing where societies somehow spontaneously find some common medium of exchange. And this is the stuff that we teach even children in school. But so modern monetary theory is not that modern at all. But what we say is that the emergence of money is always linked to some authority, to some state, modern state, to priest, king, or somebody who is able to impose taxes or dues or fees on his or her subjects, and then determine how those taxes will be paid. So modern monetary theory has this historical aspect to it that corrects the main narrative that money somehow emerges out of markets. But fast forward to the present day, modern monetary theory focuses on one very important aspect of the modern monetary system, and that is that the currency that you and I use, we carry in our wallets, the dollar, is a public monopoly. It is a creature of the state in a very literal sense. Only the government and its institutions can issue the currency that we all use. And this, though a simple observation, has profound implications for policy.
So let's go back and sort of retell for people who may not be familiar with this sort of barter origin story of money as we know it. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as the story goes, there was a time before money where in communities you would have someone who produced bread and someone else who produced, I don't know, who had chickens or whatever the case may be. And the person who had bread might need chickens, but they might need something else. And very quickly it became difficult to figure out, well, how many loaves of bread equate to one chicken? But if you actually need shoes, do you need half a chicken? But if you have bread, what do you do? So as the story goes, there was a currency that was created which had a value that made exchange far easier. And as that story is told, it does not really necessitate anything like the Federal Reserve or a government or a king. But what you're saying is that that story we've been told is not really true.
Correct. That's right. So what virtually everybody is taught in school is that we produce, yes, milk, eggs, chickens, etc. We then have to trade with one another. And we have this paradox. I don't know whether you will need my eggs, but I do need your milk. But I need the neighbor's product. And so there is this problem of coordination. I might not need the stuff you're selling, but you may need the stuff I'm selling. So the story goes that somehow we decide, we put our heads together and we say, hey, this is a difficult problem, this barter. Let's just figure out a unit, a medium of exchange to trade. You give me some coin for my eggs, and then I give it to the neighbor for the wool. Then the story goes, and this is sort of the incorrect historical story. The story goes that people figure out to use something shiny, something precious, usually gold, because it has some intrinsic value, arguably. And then eventually the state comes in and usurps the gold deposits, takes over that money that emerged from private interactions, and then started debasing the currency. So actually in the conventional story, the state is the villain in terms of how money emerges. The story that we tell, that we believe is supported by the historical anthropological record, and I should say only economists tell the barter story. Other sciences, they do not tell this story. But the one that we have uncovered is that actually the state is present from the beginning. And I really am using the state in very broad terms, that there is an authority. There is some king, priest, shaman, religious authority that tells its subjects, you have to pay dues, taxes to the gods, to me, that you can't escape. They are non-reciprocal. What's the purpose of this, of course, is to bring to the church, chickens, eggs, some real stuff. That's the reason for the tax, to provision, in a way, the priest or the church or the king. But in the act of imposing the tax, then that authority says how the tax will be paid, and suddenly that thing becomes valuable. and society begins using it as a common exchange, a common unit of exchange. So there have been very many forms of money way before gold, thousands of years before gold, that are not intrinsically valuable. Feathers, cowrie shells, you name it. But because in the cultural context of the time, that was one way to pay that tax obligation, society suddenly started using that thing as their medium of exchange. But I think what would be an interesting example to give is, for example, looking at societies that never had use for currencies. So if you look at the colonies in Africa, they were not organized in a way to sell cash crops or to have wage labor. And suddenly the colonial governors start coming in, and one way in which they can extract resources from their colonies is to impose a tax in British pounds, French francs. Now, a tribe or a community that has never used the British pound has no use for it. But suddenly the colonial governor says, no, this is the tax that you're going to pay, and I'm the only source of the British pound. So what do I need to do to satisfy the tax to the colonial governor? I have to deliver my goods, my resources, to that governor to obtain the currency I didn't need before to satisfy that tax. And this is how cash crops emerge, wage labor emerges in some societies that previously were not organized this way. So what I'm suggesting is that virtually in every context, there is some authority that says how you pay your dues, and that becomes money of that society.
One of the big sort of repercussions as those who maybe are not followers of modern monetary theory interpret the disconnect between a country's ability to produce currency and it not being connected to some a material of intrinsic value, like gold, for example, is that while, yes, the government could physically print more money, as is often the term, that this has the impact of making each unit of currency, each dollar, to take the United States, less valuable, and thus it causes inflation, so that there is really no advantage to just printing more money in order to improve the economy. Talk about the basis of that belief, first and foremost.
Well, it comes again from this barter story. The story is that the government came in, usurped power over the gold mines, and instead of minting the gold coins that society previously minted for itself, it started debasing it. It started chipping it away. It started mixing it with other non-precious metals. And eventually, the story goes, the government decided, well, forget about it. We're not going to use gold. We're just going to use paper certificates that are backed by gold. But eventually, the government decides, well, why should we back these paper certificates at all? Let's just use paper money. And this is the source of this notion that the government had no intent to maintain the value of the currency. They just wanted to inflate away its value in order to be able to spend in excess of the gold deposits. That, again, is not part of the historical record. First, money, from the very beginning, was virtual money. The very first units of money that we discover are markings on clay tablets. Clay tablets do not have any inherent value. So they are simple records of what you were saying earlier, equivalencies between products. How much barley is worth how much wheat? How much wheat can exchange for how much gold? That was the first form of money. They are virtual records. And then when you look through history of time, gold standards have existed, but they are not the norm. So in the modern world, governments and societies periodically get on and off gold, but they are not the norm. So there's nothing inherently inflationary about a society that is using non-gold money. Now, in the modern world, as you say, we have paper currency that comes from modern central banks. The central banks were indeed created to give governments flexibility in spending to deal with major crises. so at the turn of the century, we had the emergence of very many central banks, and they hold the power of the purse for the government in a way. So it is true that we created central banks that were the monopoly issuer of currencies to be able to provision the government financially when you need to deal with depression, when you have a war, when you have other policy priorities in the modern 20th century. There's nothing inherently inflationary about that. There are certain conditions that can make spending inflationary, and they deal a lot with the productivity of the economy, not simply issuing currency.
That's a good place, I think, actually, to pause. And the next part that we'll talk about is, what would the implications be for government policy if indeed modern monetary theory was to be adopted? So we'll pause there with Pavlina Tcherneva. She's an associate professor of economics at Bard College, and we'll continue our conversation.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Jeff Flake is a Republican senator. I've talked about him before. Recently, he's been, I guess, sort of like a slight voice of reason within the context of the nonsensical Republican Party. You might remember that when there was that horrible truck attack in New York City about 5 weeks ago, Donald Trump slammed Chuck Schumer for not having changed a law that Trump incorrectly blamed for that attack. And Republican Senator Jeff Flake was right there saying, hold on a second. Republicans and Democrats had a proposal to change the law, and senators from both parties failed to actually make the change. So it's not Democrat Chuck Schumer's fault. He was right. Back in June, Jeff Flake was one of the Republican senators who said that if Trump wants to continue escalation with Syria, military escalation, then there needs to be a vote for a new AUMF, an authorization to use military force, that using the authorization for force from 2001 meant to fight al-Qaeda was not going to cut it if Donald Trump wanted continued military action in Syria. And then shortly after Trump's inauguration, Jeff Flake was one of a few Republican senators who opposed the majority Muslim country travel ban. And most recently, he made news because he gave this impassioned speech on the Senate floor where he basically said, this is not normal, what's going on under Donald Trump, and I am quitting the Senate because this is so insane. So the point is, Jeff Flake, yeah, he's still a Republican. I disagree with Jeff Flake on most issues, but he's had some moments of pseudo-integrity over the last year or so. We learned yesterday that Republican Senator Jeff Flake donated to the Democratic candidate in the Alabama Senate race, where the Republican candidate is alleged serial child sex abuser Roy Moore. Tweeting a picture, did Jeff Flake, of his donation check, where he wrote simply "country over party," and it's a picture of a $100 check written out of his and presumably this is his wife's account, he and his wife's account. And Doug Jones later thanked Jeff Flake for the donation on Twitter, saying, "Thanks, Jeff. I hope others will donate too. Hashtag 1 week, hashtag right side of history." So listen, this is not a story for me to cheerlead Jeff Flake as someone that progressives should support, but that's the incredible thing. The Republican Party has become so divorced from even like the most basic modicum of morality and ethics, and they're so embroiled in such extreme partisanship that just me saying, hey, here's a Republican who's not supporting the serial alleged child molester, it almost sounds like in 2017, I'm saying this is someone that I support politically, which is not true, right? In years past, you might have to go decades ago, people would disagree vehemently politically, but they would be more or less on the same page in terms of, hey, Roy Moore is accused by 6 people, credibly, of sexual assault, but let's put politics aside and just say this isn't a good potential senator. Neither party wants people with these credible allegations against them to be serving in the Senate. Politics aside, at some point in American history, our lawmakers would have been unanimous in saying presidential candidate accused by more than a dozen women of sexual assault, including a 13-year-old girl of rape, ridiculed Hispanics, ridiculed Muslims, ridiculed the disabled reporter, on and on. Let's put politics aside and decide it's bad for the country to support someone like that. But we've fallen so far from that when someone like Jeff Flake merely says, I'm not with the alleged child sex predator, regardless of my party, some people will misinterpret that as me saying I agree with Jeff Flake's politics. That's not the case. That's just not the case at all.
And I think, most Republicans with any hint of integrity left, they're not going to support Roy Moore. Maybe they'll stay home if they're voting in Alabama. Maybe they'll support a write-in candidate.
I don't
but
know.
then you're de facto supporting Doug Jones. And I think Jeff Flake is just going right to the source here. Why beat around the bush?
Maybe. I don't know that I agree with you. I think that Roy Moore has more actual, genuine support from Alabama Republicans than... I mean, you're presenting an optimistic
Those with
view.
any integrity left, right?
Yeah, right, which is what percentage of them, I guess. That's
We'll
the
find
question.
out.
Jeff Flake is sort of like, there's this term in the startup world called the minimum viable product, which is sort of like the minimum thing you need to put together to be able to say, hey, it's ready for some people to use this. That sort of applies here to Jeff Flake in some sense. We're not saying that he has great views on taxation. In fact, he voted in support of this harebrained, disgusting tax bill recently. We're not saying we agree with him on social policy. All we're saying is he meets the absolute minimum criteria to be a reasonable person, which is that he's just not going to support the alleged serial child sex assaulter. That's all.
And remember, he's essentially a lame duck. I mean, he's not running for re-election in 2018.
Yeah.
So that's what it took for him to be one of those people.
Absolutely. December 12th is election day in Alabama. December 11th is the deadline for postmarking absentee ballots in that election. If you're voting absentee, donate, phone bank, knock on doors. Donate, phone bank, knock on doors. I don't know that we realize, that everybody realizes the extent of the opportunity that there is here to turn a very, very red state, Alabama, and particularly a seat previously held by the now Attorney General Jeff Sessions, into a Democratic seat. It is a gigantic opportunity. And aside from that, you've got an alleged serial child sex assaulter there who might be the next senator from Alabama. Let's not let it happen. Let's go now from talking about Jeff Flake in the context of Roy Moore to the RNC and Donald Trump in the context of the Alabama Senate race. Back on November 20th, I reported to you that the Republican National Committee had pulled out of Roy Moore, or better said, maybe that's not the right way to say it. They pulled support from Roy Moore's campaign after multiple allegations of Moore having sexually assaulted women and girls. They removed money, they removed people from the December 12th special election where Doug Jones is the Democratic opposition to Republican Roy Moore. The RNC has now quietly returned their support to Roy Moore. They got, I guess, some PR benefit from having pulled their support initially, just as the polling was bottoming out for Roy Moore. Now Donald Trump has sort of endorsed or has endorsed Roy Moore. It's been a couple of weeks since the latest allegations. And now that the Republican Party realized, wait a second, we prefer the child sex assaulter instead of the Democrat, the RNC is fully back in helping Roy Moore in Alabama, not Indiana. They have absolutely no shame. Donald Trump a couple days ago tweeted his support for Roy Moore, saying Democrats' refusal to give even one vote for massive tax cuts is why we need Republican Roy Moore to win in Alabama. We need his vote on stopping crime, illegal immigration, border wall, military, pro-life, VA, judges' Second Amendment, and more. No to Jones, a Pelosi-Schumer puppet. And indeed, the RNC is back in Roy Moore. They are now putting money and staff behind his campaign. Now, what's the on-the-record explanation from the RNC? We don't have one. We know that a couple weeks ago, RNC chairwoman Ronna Romney McDaniel said, quote, the recent allegations against Judge Moore are deeply troubling. He should step aside if there is any truth to them at all. We know that there is still no reason to question any of the allegations. And we know that the RNC, that an RNC official confirmed to the Daily Beast that, yes, they are back to supporting Roy Moore. But we know nothing else other than what we know about the Republican Party, which is that they're the opposite of everything that they claim to be. The Republican Party claims to be about family values, and very clearly, this example tells us that they're not. the Republican Party claims to be about small government, except when they want to enforce their religious and social ideas, at which point they have no problem with government getting very, very big. They claim to be about fiscal conservatism, except when it's tax cuts for the rich that explode the debt. Jeff Flake said, as I told you earlier in today's program, country over party, and that's why he donated $100 to Doug Jones against his party colleague, Republican Roy Moore. The party overall is the party of party over country, and that's reflected in their support for Trump in the 2016 election, and it's reflected in their support for Roy Moore in this special election, and it's absolutely and totally pathetic.
And I think they're just following the polls, which requires absolutely no integrity. I mean, when it looked like Roy Moore was a long shot soon after the allegations broke, obviously they're going to pull funding because you're just taking so much political risk. Now that he's catching up and perhaps leading, why not go along with it? He has a chance.
And that tells us what? That none of these decisions have anything to do with ethics or morality or family values or conservatism or what's right or what's wrong. It merely has to do with political posturing. And the bottom line is they prefer the alleged serial child sex abuser to the Democrat. There's no simpler way to say it. That's exactly what it is.
More money, more problems?
Well, yes, in some way. And I guess at this point, we have a major, major problem for the Republican Party around the country, if indeed this backfires. And I really, really hope that it does. We've got a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Couple voicemails today. I mentioned recently, and we got a call, I believe it was Grover and maybe a couple other people, saying that they would be interested in me doing explainer videos about not only investment, but also cryptocurrency. Here's one caller who at least seems to agree with that idea.
Hey, David, I would really like it if you would do a series of videos on cryptocurrency, or just more videos on cryptocurrencies, and more videos on investing. I think a lot of your audience is probably pretty young. I'm pretty young myself and recently got into investing. I think it's something that a lot of people don't realize how much potential there is in just putting a little bit of your money aside. And I think it could be really beneficial, especially with the stock market doing pretty good this year. I don't know if that's going to last, but yeah, I think it would be really awesome. Thanks.
So we got a lot of messages like that, which really encouraged me to do content about cryptocurrency and investment and all sorts of other related topics. But what concerns me is the subject, the content of this next voicemail that came in. Listen to this.
Hey, David, I just put about half my bank account into Bitcoin, which is about $800. So thanks. Upon your advice, I'm going to be rich, and I'm investing in Bitcoin. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Thank you for all your advice.
Now, that is someone who is an admitted troll. That's the guy from Texas who called in and said, yeah, about half my calls are trolling. But it actually is a concern I have, which is even though if we talked about that stuff, just because I'm telling you how you would buy Bitcoin if you wanted to, that doesn't mean I'm recommending that you buy Bitcoin. And my concern is, and that's a troll, that's not real. But my concern would be, Pat, that people would interpret me telling you how to buy Bitcoin as a particular recommendation. And that's my concern about doing that type of content. How many times am I going to have to every other sentence say none of this is investment advice?
I think we might as well just put a watermark on the entire video saying
that says this is not
you can't
advice.
Take our advice.
I don't know. That does concern me because the last thing I want to do is have people. That's fake. But imagine if someone did at $12,000 Bitcoin value invest half of their money, and then it drops to $8,000, and then they lose a third of their money instantly. I don't want to be responsible for that stuff.
And I mean, that caller calls in and says that half the time he's trolling and half the time he's not. So how do we know which half of the time he's trolling? Was he trolling there? Was he trolling when he told us that he trolls half the time?
I think that he's trolling there at least. Yeah, I hope that he didn't actually invest half his money in Bitcoin because of some completely non-existent recommendation that I clearly never actually made. But anyway, we are thinking about how to do cryptocurrency type explainer videos and maybe some other investment type videos. We've got a great bonus show for you today. The Supreme Court may be sounding skeptical about that Colorado baker's refusal to make a gay wedding cake. We'll also talk about children in Mexico falling sick around a Mexican lake under sort of odd circumstances. And we'll also talk about upcoming website changes. All of that and more on the bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership, patreon.com/davidpakman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.